Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Torah studies. The pre-Passover Torah studies that we're going to discover today, this evening, a deeper understanding of really something that there's certain things we don't pay attention. The Rebbe brings out the whole understanding of what the seder is all about. So we're going to celebrate Passover next Friday night, and once again families around the world are gathering around the table. So of course it's a beautiful opportunity for families to get together and beautiful celebrations. But then again, we look at the seder. What do we do at the seder? We have the same routine that we do. We get the matzahs, we get the wine, and we eat the maror. Those are the mitzvahs of the holidays. We're doing the same routine. Of course, it's important to know those are the things really, which is the most important things in that night. When it's Friday night, the 15th, Saturday night, the 16th, we need to eat the matzah, we need to eat the maror, the bitter herbs, and we need to drink the 4 cups of wine. And also, one part of the mitzvah is to tell the story of the Exodus of Egypt. That is why we read the Haggadah. And the question is, why do we do it? Yes, some people find looks for all kinds of tricks, not that children shouldn't get bored, to do all kinds of games. And why do we do the same routine again and again every year? And we are here now 3,334 years since the Exodus of Egypt. Why do we still celebrate? Okay, it happened, a major event happened to our ancestors. So 3,000 years ago. But why is it still relevant today? So to understand those questions, we're going to read the beginning of what we read in the Haggadah, the booklet that we read during the Passover, the traditional reading. And the Rebbe points out some questions and very things that are overlooked, very basic, simple questions, and the readings that we read. And the Rabbi is going to give a deeper understanding of the whole idea of the celebration, what we celebrate by the Exodus of Egypt. And it will show us how this is really relevant today. So let's begin. Okay, so this is the topic today. Redemption is never over. Reliving the Exodus in real time. So this is the question we're asking. Why must we repeat the same seder and the same conversational themes every year? How is the Exodus still relevant today? So let's see at those verses in the beginning of the Haggadah. The Haggadah, of course, we do right at the beginning of the Seder. We make the Kiddush, and then we say the Magid, the Haggadah. The Haggadah, we begin with the questions, but even before we ask the question, before the children ask the 4 questions, the Manishtana, we begin with this statement. Hey lachma anya, diachalu avasana be'arad mitzrayim. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. And that's question number 1 is, the bread that we ate wasn't in the land of Egypt. We took it out from Egypt. We made bread, and because, as we say, that our ancestors, they were rushed out of Egypt, so that's why they baked bread quickly, so they ate it outside of Egypt. And this is the question that Abu Draham is asking. So, why do we refer to the matzah on our table as the bread eaten out by our ancestors in Egypt? Didn't our ancestors ate the matzah after they left Egypt because they were rushing to leave Egypt and had no time to let their dough rise? That's what we say in the Haggadah, don't we? Another question here is also, what do we celebrate on Passover? What is the holiday all about? That's a holiday of reliving the freedom. And this holiday was supposed to bring out our best utensils, the cups and the knives and everything should be beautiful. We sit in a very comfortable chair. All kinds of things we do to show how we live like kings. We lean when we eat, and all kinds of things we do that night. At the night of the seder is to celebrate our freedom. So why is it that you begin, the very first statement that you begin, you talk about the bread of affliction, lachma anya, of the poor? Why mention this? This is not what you said, what this night is all about. It's about the freedom. And another thing we're saying in this first sentence before we begin is we're talking about the poor people, whoever is in need, all the needy, let them come and join us. Okay, let's see inside. That's the next thing we're saying. Kol dichfenye teve yechol, whoever is hungry, come and eat. Whoever is in need, come and participate in the Paschal lamb. So, again, same question. Why do we highlight the sufferings on this night? And also, surrounded as we are traditionally in luxury, why do we trumpet the fact that there are needy among us? And really, that statement, it's not really, you're not, obviously you care for the needy, but this is not about inviting the needy. When do we say this statement? If you want to invite the needy people, say it before you come to the city. Say it in shul. See whoever is around. Do it the way Chabad does that. Advertise in the newspaper. Whoever wants to have a seder for Passover, come and join us. But we're sitting in the seder. Everybody's in comfortable chairs. And we say, all who are needy, let them come and join us. Obviously, we're not here to invite. It's just making a statement that there are among us those who are needy, those who are hungry, and we need to help them. So again, the question is, why mention this depressing fact that there's still people among us who are suffering or needy? You know, this is you're doing right in the beginning of the Seder. In the beginning, you're bringing your children, bringing your family to celebrate the beautiful freedom. And the first impression, what do? You talk about the bread of affliction. You talk about the needy. And the same thing is also similar with the next part of that statement. As we read the next part, what do we read? Ashata hacha. This year we are here, and next year we will be in the land of Israel. This year we are enslaved, and the next year we will be free. Same question. Why do we mention those things? Why do we mention those things? And really, the Rebbe points out that there is a very fundamental question that as soon as we sit down by the Seder, And we say we're going now to celebrate the freedom of our ancestors. The question that rises to every child is why, if God he took us out of Egypt, if God redeemed us, God's redemption isn't supposed to be a godly redemption. What does it mean godly? It's not a human redemption. A human redemption is limited to whatever human capacity. You're being redeemed from this nation, you can be enslaved with another nation. But if God comes and redeems us, on that night we celebrate God's redemption, how come we are still suffering? How come we are still in exile? And if this was something that we were in exile, we were redeemed, and we were back to the same situation. So what is the point of celebrating this godly redemption if it's not the real ultimate final redemption? And this is what we are addressing here. The Haggadah addresses that question, as we will explain. But to answer those questions, we really have to go back. We really have to go back to the beginning of everything, to the very beginning. And when I say the very beginning, I mean the very beginning, the beginning of creation. Because you see, the way Judaism looks at everything, it's all part of one big plan. From the beginning of creation, 5,782 years ago, until this day, it is a journey. It is a plan, a godly plan that has its ups and downs and has its steps during this journey. And when God created the world in the beginning, it was a beautiful world, a godly world. God had Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, where it was a place where the only existence, the only reality that existed was God's reality. There was no such thing as a temptation to sin. And there was no desire to commit sins. And for that reason, Hashem, God commanded Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge, as we read in the Torah, that when Hashem said to Adam that in the day that you eat from the tree of knowledge, you'll know the feeling of evil. That led to the fall. That there was a mixture then, that the evil got involved, and then it became the temptation to commit something which is not godly. As we see, Rabbi Or Chaim says, okay, this is the question that we asked. So this is God's primary reason for prohibiting the tree of knowledge was to prevent the human mind from grasping or perceiving the notion of transgression, to be focused completely on holiness without conceiving of the possibility of turning from God. That's the way it was originally. This is what King Solomon meant when he wrote, God made man upright. What does it mean upright? Upright, unlike the animal. The animal has the head together with the back. The man is upright. Says the Or Chaim, the human was made with only one kind of knowledge, that of holiness. Yashar. Thoughts of transgression did not figure into our imagination and fantasies at the time of our creation. So that's the way Hashem created us. And then what happened? The snake, the serpent. The serpent came and he introduced the evil, and ever since we're suffering. That caused the shame to Adam and Eve. As he continues, when Adam and Eve partook of the tree of knowledge, they first became aware of the possibility of transgression and were ashamed. They were ashamed that there's such a thing as going against God. That did not exist before they ate from the tree. As the following passage attests, and they knew that they were naked and they were ashamed. What happened subsequently? So after they committed this first sin, that was only the beginning of the downfall. Later on, as the Medrash goes on to say, there were 6 other generations that committed additional sins that caused the entire world to be even more distant from God. And we're going to see it as the Medrash says that those of you who study the Rebbe's Maimer from the Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat, you're familiar with that Medrash, that talks about the godliness that ascended from this world up to the 7th heaven, that was caused by the 7 sins. And this says the Medrash. When Adam sinned, the divine presence ascended to the 1st heaven. When Cain sinned, when he killed his brother, it ascended to the 2nd heaven. When Enosh sinned, he started the idolatry. It ascended to the 3rd heaven. When the generation of the deluge, the flood, they sinned, it ascended to the 4th heaven. When the generation that built the Tower of Babel sinned, it ascended to the 5th heaven. When the residents of Sodom sinned, it ascended to the 6th heaven. And in the lifetime of Abraham, the Egyptians sinned. They were very, very immoral people. And that caused it ascended to the 7th heaven. So Abraham was born in the year 1948 from the creation of the world. And that, when Abraham was 75 years old, in the year 2023, that was when ultimately the Shekhinah, the divine presence, due to the sins of the Egyptians, was ascended completely to the world, to the higher worlds. And this world was completely godless. There were very few people in this world, the grandchildren of Noah, that they knew about God. They were, indeed, Abraham found them and he was able to learn from them. But Abraham himself, he came by himself to reverse this process. Abraham was the first one that, by him searching and finding God and teaching this to people, he started to reverse this process of bringing God down closer to us, God's presence. And as the Medrash says in the next text, we see it. So it says, Kenegdon, opposite those 7 generations that caused the ascending of godliness. So opposite them arose 7 righteous people and returned the divine presence to earth. Abraham merited to usher it from the 7th heaven to the 6th. Isaac arose and ushered it from the 6th to the 5th. Jacob arose and ushered it from the 5th to the 4th. Levi arose, Levi was Jacob's son, of course, arose and ushered it from the 4th to the 3rd. Kehat arose and ushered it from the third to the second. Amram, the father of Moses, arose and ushered it from the second to the first. And Moses arose and ushered it to earth. Okay? That's what happened. So a downward spiral of obscuring godliness in the world began with Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge. And then when Moses gathered the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, so Abraham began the reversal leading up to Moses. And then when Moses gathered the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, the divine presence was finally revealed on earth. And when we're saying the divine presence was revealed on earth, it was not in the same way that it was in the beginning. Because in the beginning of creation, it was godly revelation. It was a godly revelation from above. It had nothing to do with the ones below. It had nothing to do with Adam and Eve, the godly revelation. It was God was there. God, they were born into this situation. But then after this decline of godliness, the ascension of godliness into the higher places and separation from this world, then came Abram and started to reverse this. But then it was done with the work of the bottom, the work of those below, of the people below. That in each generation, there were those who were seeking and searching and finding themselves. They finding themselves the connection, finding themselves the revelation of God in them, in the world. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and all these tzaddikim, the righteous people. And there's a beautiful writing of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. And he writes about these two ways of godly revelation in this world and how they differ and how there is something special about the way of doing it by the people, by coming from below. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs says as follows: the Jewish mystics distinguish between two types of divine human encounter. They call them itaruta de le'ela, which means an awakening from above, and itaruta de latata, respectively, an awakening from above and awakening from below. The first is initiated by God, the second by mankind. An awakening from above is spectacular, supernatural, an event that bursts through the chains of causality, that at other times binds the natural world. That is an awakening from above. It goes beyond measures, beyond our abilities. An awakening from below has no such grandeur. It is a gesture that is human, all too human. Yet, there is another difference between them in the opposite direction. So on the one hand, we say the awakening from above is much greater. It's a godly revelation, but there's much more power in a way to the awakening that comes from below. An awakening from above may change nature, but it does not, in and of itself, change human nature. In it, no human effort has been expended. Those to whom it appears are passive. The revelation from above, they're passive. It just happens from above. While it lasts, it is overwhelming, but only while it lasts. Like they say the Mount Sinai, had a revelation, but the Mount Sinai didn't become holy. Only while God was on the Mount Sinai, it had its holiness. So it says, thereafter, people revert to what they were. An awakening from below, by contrast, leaves a permanent mark. Because human beings have taken the initiative, something in them changes. Their horizons of possibility have been expanded. They now know they are capable of great things. Once you create something with your own, you know that you are capable of doing those things. And because they did so once, they are aware that they can do so again. An awakening from above temporarily transformed the external world. But an awakening from below permanently transforms our internal world. The first changes the universe. The second changes us. So you see, this is the difference between the awakening from above, what happened in Garden of Eden at the beginning of the creation, and the awakening from below, what happened through the 7 righteous people and their generations, that they brought down the Shekhinah right here. However, what Avraham did, he was the tzaddik. He was the righteous person. And he was able to bring from below and to reach up to the godly revelation. But he was just one person. He was a person that brought down the Shekhinah, and he taught as much as he could, but he was not able to transform everyone in his generation the way he was transformed. The same thing with all the others. This changed when Moshe Rabbeinu came, when Moses came. Moses was the 7th of these tzaddikim, and his job was to bring the Shekhinah down to earth. To bring God's presence down to earth. And this was supposed to be something that was not only unique for the righteous people, for the leaders of the generation. This transformation was meant that the entire nation, the entire Jewish people, they would be transformed. They would also experience this godly revelation. The godly revelation that comes from above, they were supposed to transform, that they should happen, they should be revealed within them. So you see, this happened when? In order to be able to do this, this was the purpose of the time, the exile that the Jewish people experienced in the land of Egypt. The experience that they had, the difficult experience, really changed them. And just like any difficult situation leads a person to get a little different perspective of life. God gave Abraham the choice. He told him, your children can be in either suffering in Gehenna, or to go through the exile. And he chose exile. And this exile was a form of purification. The suffering in Egypt was a form of purification. So, the Alter Rebbe says this: Egypt is a proverbial furnace, like a refining pot for silver, and a kiln for gold. A kiln separates the base metals from silver and gold, so that the silver becomes pure, rather than a mixture of precious and base metal. Egypt too acted as a kiln. The harsh bondage, working with clay and bricks, refined the Jewish people and separated the bad from the good. You see, because that was the opposite of what happened with the original sins. The separation from God leads to desires. But the fact that the person goes through difficulties, he realizes what is important in life itself. It's like any time when people go through difficult times. Children grow up very fast. Their perspective on life changes. Forget more about themselves. They focus on what's real. People discover God under pressure. So this was supposed to do the exile of Egypt, the 210 years that the Jewish people spent in Egypt. That was supposed to be a complete refinery, that the Jews should be completely refined and capable of receiving this godly understanding and perspective of connecting with God and finding what's real, and to be just like Abraham. All of them. This was supposed to affect each and every one. However, something went wrong. What went wrong? Something went wrong, and indeed the Jewish people came out of Egypt, but they didn't come out completely refined. In fact, they came out almost as bad as the Egyptians. Our sages tell us that the Jewish people were, in the time of when they were in Egypt, they were lowered to the 49 levels of impurity. Almost at the 49th level. They were in the 49, almost in the bottom. If Hashem would not have taken them out at the last moment, they would be lost forever. What happened? What went wrong? What went wrong was that the Egyptian immorality had an effect on the Jewish people. It affected them in a way that went beyond the plan. The plan was that the sufferings there was supposed to make them, purify them. But instead, the sufferings, not only the suffering, they're being completely in the Egyptian world, living in Egypt, being amongst the Egyptians, affected them also spiritually. And we see it also in the verse that we read in the Haggadah, verse from the Torah. Interesting verse. As it says like this: Vayareyu Eisanu. The Egyptians were bad us. What does that mean? The Egyptians, obviously it doesn't make sense, this sentence. The Egyptians, in Hebrew it says Vayareyu Atanu. If you will be forgiven for verbalizing a noun, we would say the Egyptians battered us. If you want to say that the Egyptians were bad to us, you could say Vayareyu Lano in Hebrew, that they did bad to us. The passage should have stated they were bad to us, but doesn't say that. Vayareyu Otano, they battered us, they made us bad. This teaches us that the Egyptians made us bad and sinful, causing us to learn from their behavior. So this is what happened then, that the Jews were there to be refined. And yes, whatever, it did affect them, obviously. They were refined. But at the same time, they were also affected with it negatively by the spiritual influence of the Egyptians. And because of that, they were in a way like equal to the Egyptians. And because of that, as if justice would be served, the Jews did not deserve at the time to be redeemed. And therefore, what happened then? As the Haggadah says, as the Torah says, that Hashem, God himself, came and redeemed you. He took us out. He took us out from that situation. And he took us out with a strong arm. Meaning that Hashem brought this godly revelation at the time of the Exodus of Egypt. So it was a process of refinement, but yet it was not complete. And because it was not complete, they couldn't be redeemed a complete redemption. It was God that ultimately revealed himself to them and took him out of this. As we can see in the next text from the Be'er Maim Chaim, says, now, if the Jews had been worthy of redemption, the barrier between the Jews and God would have disappeared completely, forevermore, never to be remembered or mentioned again. However, because they escaped Egypt in a less than optimal state, the barrier remained. It can still exert influence over the Jewish souls, depending on the measure of its power and stature, which is commensurate with the state of the Jew at any given time. So the fact that it could be still exile, as we asked in the beginning, how could it be? Is because it wasn't a complete redemption. They had the Egypt still in them. As the famous saying goes, you can take out the Jew of Egypt, or you cannot. It's harder to take out Egypt out of the Jew. You see, this explains also why throughout the 40 years that the Jews spent in the desert, they sinned again and again so many times. They rebelled and sinned. Why? Because really they were not rid of their evil completely. Okay. So this explains this phenomena. Not refined enough, God has had to initiate the relationship. And so it was temporary. Like we said before, something that is initiated from above, it's not permanent. It's temporary. While God waits for us to find him, we are struggling with temptations. But then again, the question is, if that is the case, if it wasn't a permanent redemption, if it was a temporary redemption, why do we celebrate the Exodus of Egypt? So we were redeemed, but what's now? And at the same time also, And this holiday of Passover, as we said in the beginning, we are supposed to feel redeemed. How could we feel free? How could we feel redeemed if we still are in the same state of exile? The Yetzer Hara is still strong. That's the question. Why are we celebrating an Exodus that wasn't complete? And how are we to experience a state of liberty and freedom we can't really have? And this is the explanation that we started in the beginning. This comes, the Rabbi gives us this beautiful explanation. We asked in the beginning, how can we feel free? How come we are not free? And the Rebbe comes to explain the question that is asked by every child, how come we are still in exile? That is the answer. The answer is because that redemption was not a complete redemption. The redemption from Egypt, we call it the lachma anya, the bread of the poor, because the achalu b'mitzrayim. We asked the question, how come we call it the bread, the matzah that they ate in Egypt if they was outside of Egypt? Because they were still in Egypt. They still didn't take out the Egypt from them. God came and took them out. But they were not really, truly, eternally redeemed. Says the Rebbe as follows. The matzah that our ancestors ate after they left Egypt, the one that did not have time to rise before the Exodus, etc., is described in the passage as matzah that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. This emphasizes that the manner of their Exodus was not complete. In their mindset, the Jewish people, even after the Exodus, were still in Egypt, as it were. And here explains the Rebbe. This comes the explanation of the introduction to the seder. The introduction to the seder before we sit down to the seder and to celebrate, we have to know the reality, but in the same time realize that what just happened. What happened in the time of Egypt? What happened was that God opened up the door. This is why we say, now we are still slaves. Now we are still here in the exile, but next year in Jerusalem. This is to say that this is the holiday of Pesach, is something that not happened 3,000 years ago. It is something that happens today. It is something that happens every single day. Every single day, God gave us that power to become truly free. Meaning, when He revealed Himself from in Egypt, and He took us out from the boundary of the limitations of the world, of the Egyptians of the world. We're not talking about nation of Egypt that we know today. We're talking about the Mitzrayim. In Hebrew, Mitzrayim means limitations. This type of limitations is something that is every single day a journey to go out of these limitations. As the Rebbe explains, this is the meaning of the second sentence of the opening passage. Whoever is hungry, whoever is in need, we still suffer poverty, suffering, exile, and subjugation. Because of what? Because our ancestors remained in Egypt. They never really escaped their submission to the culture of Egypt. So this is the answer. Why do we highlight our sufferings on this night? And why were the freedom and prosperity granted on this night reversed? And the answer is that the opening statement of the Seder night explains that the matzah identifies our partial exodus from Egypt. And we still celebrate the effort toward the final redemption. And this continues the Be'er Mayim Chaim and explains. It says, however, the Jewish people do not rest or stand idly by. They constantly observe the divine commandments, day and night, each commensurate with their ability. Thereby, their souls escape the barrier a little each day until the time arrives when the good works of the Jews will strip this barrier of all power. At that time, the Jewish people will experience a final redemption, not to be followed by any subsequent exile. And the Rebbe goes on and says, the passage therefore continues and state that indeed we are now here, but next year we will be in Israel. We might be enslaved now, but next year we will be free. The exodus from Egypt opens the path and pipeline of redemption that will lead eventually to the complete redemption next year in the land of Israel as a free people. Therefore, we can fulfill the mitzvah of telling the story of our exodus from Egypt on this night and of experiencing it this night as if we have completely emerged from our subjugation to Egypt. In fact, by telling the story of the Exodus, as we are living Egypt today, we are liberated for the moment from our subjugation to Egypt. And thus pave the way to becoming truly free. This is in accordance with the teachings that the entire time span from the Exodus from Egypt until the future redemption is a continual and progressive process of living Egypt. The Friedrich Rebbe once said, by the end of the Haggadah, we say, Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim, that next year in Jerusalem doesn't mean that we have to wait for next year. When we say next year in Jerusalem, that means we're going to be out today. And if we're out today, obviously, next year we'll be in Jerusalem. And this gives us a whole new understanding by the seder. We started with these questions. We started with the question, why do we repeat? Why is it important, this routine? Why is it that we mention about the bread of affliction? And there's more questions in this Haggadah that we say. And the Rebbe answers this by giving this understanding as an introduction to the Seder. We sit down and we say, what are we doing here? Why all these sufferings? Of course, we always ask Hashem, enough for the suffering. No one says that we should be suffering. On the contrary, as the Rebbe says, we should never justify our sufferings. God does not need us as his attorneys. We don't understand God. We don't understand why those things are happening. And we are asking ad masay, until when? We need Mashiach now. But at the same time, it gives us an understanding. And it gives us an ability to truly celebrate the freedom today. We celebrate the freedom today. It's not something that happened 3,000 years ago. It's something that is happening today. If today we tell ourselves that we are going out of Egypt today. How? Because God revealed himself with a yad chazakah, with a strong hand. That means that when there is something in our way of serving Hashem, as difficult as it may seem, it doesn't have the power to overcome our godly will that we have, that God brought in us that natural love to Hashem, as we learned in the Tanya. So this gives us a really a good preparation to understand as we sit down. We're going to sit down next Friday night, not this coming, in the 15th, to the seder. And by then, for sure, we will have the Mashiach. We'll be celebrating in Yerushalayim. And before that, we'll celebrate the Rebbe's 120th birthday next Tuesday. Hopefully, we'll do it together with the Rebbe himself in Yerushalayim in the Beis HaMikdash. So thank you all for joining tonight. And if anyone has any questions, we can discuss it now. And don't forget to share this and subscribe.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohen.
You're very welcome, Isaac.